Chapter 15, Part 2. Channels of Information. One important goal of any interface is to communicate information. Determining the best way for your game to communicate necessary information to the player requires some thoughtful design, since games can often contain a great deal of information and often much of it is needed at the same time. To figure out the best way to present the information in your game, try following these steps. Referring back to our interface data flow diagram from the beginning of this chapter, we are mostly talking about arrows 5, which is world to the virtual interface, and 6, the virtual interface to the physical output. Step 1. List and prioritize information. A game has to present a lot of information, but it is not all equally important. Let's say we were designing an interface for a game similar to the classic NES game, Legend of Zelda. We might begin by listing all of the information the player needs to see. A simple and prioritized list might look like 1. Number of rubies, 2. Number of keys, 3. Health, 4. Immediate surroundings, 5. Distant surroundings, 6. Other inventory, 7. The current weapon, 8. Current treasure, and 9. The number of bombs. Now, we might sort these by importance. Need to know every moment would be 4. Immediate surroundings. Need to glance at from time to time while playing would be 1. Number of rubies, 2. Number of keys, 3. Health, 5. Distant surroundings, and 7. Current weapon, 8. Current treasure, 9. Number of bombs. And for the category of need to know only occasionally, it'd be 6. Other inventory. Step 2. List channels. A channel of information is just a way of communicating a stream of data. Exactly what the channels are varies from game to game, and there's a lot of flexibility in how you choose them. Some possible channels of information might be the top center of the screen, the bottom right of the screen, my avatar, game sound effects, game music, the border of the game screen, the chest of the approaching enemy, and the word balloon over a character's head. It can be a good idea to list out the possible channels that you think you might use. In Legend of Zelda, the main channels of information the designers settled on were the main display area and the dashboard of information at the top of the screen. Also, they decided there would be a mode change the player could activate by hitting the select button. We'll discuss mode changes later in this chapter. And this select button would change it so that there would be different channels of information. There would be the auxiliary display area and the dashboard of information at the bottom of the screen. Step 3. Map information to channels. Now, the difficult task comes of mapping the types of information to the different channels. This is usually done partly by instinct, partly by experience, and mostly by trial and error, drawing lots of little sketches, thinking about them, and then redrawing them until you think you have something worth trying out. In Zelda, the mapping is as follows. The main display area would be 4. The immediate surroundings. Dashboard of information at the top of the screen communicates the number of rubies, the number of keys, health, the distant surroundings, the current weapon, the current treasure, and the number of bombs. And the auxiliary display area would communicate other inventory. Taking a look at the main screen and subscreen, you can see other interesting choices that were made. Note that the dashboard information is so important to gameplay that it needs to be shown all the time on both the main screen and subscreen. And the contents of the dashboard really involve 7 different channels of information. Notice how they split them up. Life was deemed so important that it got nearly 1/3 of the interface. Rubies, keys, and bombs, though their functions are different, each have to communicate a 2-digit number, so they are all grouped together. The weapon and treasure you are holding are so important that they have little boxes around them. The A and B are reminders to the player about which buttons to hit in order to use these items. Also note on the inventory screen how extra space was used to give the player some instruction on how to use it. You can see that even though this is a relatively simple interface compared to more modern games, there were many decisions the designer made about how to lay it out, and these decisions made a significant impact on the game experience. Step 4. Review use of dimensions. A channel of information in a game can have several dimensions. For example, if you have decided to map damage to an enemy to numbers that fly out of the enemy, you have several dimensions you can work out on that channel, or you can work with on that channel. Some of these might be the number you display, the color of the number, the size of the numerals, and the font of the numerals. Now you have to decide which of these dimensions, if any, you want to use. Surely you will use the first one, number. But will the color mean anything? Perhaps you will use the other dimensions as reinforcers of the information. Numbers under 50 will be white and small, numbers from 50 to 99 will be yellow and medium-sized, but numbers 100 and over will be red and very large, and in a special font to emphasize the amount of damage. And while using multiple dimensions on a channel to reinforce a piece of information is a way to make the information very clear and also kind of juicy, you could also take a different approach and decide to put different pieces of information on the different dimensions. For example, you might decide to color the numbers to indicate friend, white, or foe, red. Then you might make the size of the numbers indicate how close the character is to defeat. Small numerals might mean the character has a lot of hit points left, while large numerals might mean that they are about to die. This kind of technique can be very efficient and elegant. By using a single number, you have communicated 3 different pieces of information. The risk is that you have to educate the player on what these different dimensions on one channel of information represent, which might be difficult for some players to understand or remember. Good use of channels and dimensions is what makes for an elegant, well laid out interface, so we can keep a special lens around for this kind of examination. 66. The lens of channels and dimensions. Choosing how to map game information to channels and dimensions is the heart of designing your game interface. Use this lens to make sure you do it thoughtfully and well. Ask yourself these questions. What data need to travel to and from the player? Which data are most important? What channels do I have available to transmit this data? Which channels are most appropriate for which data, and why? Which dimensions are available on the different channels? How should I use those dimensions? Modes. What is an interface mode? Simply put, it is a change in one of the mapping arrows, 1 to 6, in our interface diagram. For example, if pressing the B button changes the functionality of the gamepad so that instead of making your avatar run around, it makes your avatar aim a water hose, which is a mode change, the mapping on arrow number 1, the physical interface, to the world has just changed. Mode changes can happen as a result of mapping changes on any of the 6 arrows. Modes are a great way to add variety to your game, but you must be very careful, since you run a risk of confusing the player if they don't realize that a mode change has occurred. Here are a few tips to avoid getting in trouble with interface modes. Mode tip number 1. Use as few modes as possible. The fewer the modes, the less chance a player is going to get confused. Having multiple interface modes isn't a bad thing, but you should add modes cautiously, for each one is something the new player is going to have to learn and understand. Mode tip number 2. Avoid overlapping modes. Just as we have channels of information from the game to the player, there are similar channels of information from the player to the game. Each button or thumbstick is a channel of information. For example, let's say you have a game that lets you change between walking mode, the thumbstick navigates, and throwing mode, the thumbstick aims. Later, you decide to add a driving mode as well, the thumbstick steers a car. What happens if the player changes into throwing mode while they are driving? You could try to allow this, potentially putting you into 2 modes at once, driving and throwing. And while this might work, it also might be a disaster if the thumbstick is simultaneously steering a car and controlling an aiming interface. It might be wiser to move the aiming, in all cases, to a second thumbstick if your physical interface has one. By making your modes distinct and non-overlapping, you keep yourself out of trouble. If you find you need to have overlapping modes, make sure they use different channels of information on the interface. For example, the thumbstick could have two navigating modes, flying or walking, and the button has two shooting modes, shoot fireball or lightning bolt. These modes are on completely different dimensions, so they can overlap safely. I can switch between shooting fireballs and shooting lightning bolts while either walking or flying with no confusing effects. Mode tip number 3. Make different modes look as different as possible. In other words, look at your modes with lens number 63, feedback, and lens number 62, transparency. If a player doesn't know what mode they are in, they are going to be confused and frustrated. The old Unix text editing system, VI, pronounced as VI, was a symphony of confusing modes. Most people would expect that a text editor, when it started up, would be in a mode that would allow you to enter text, but not so for VI. It was actually in a mode where each letter of the keyboard either would issue a command, like delete line, or would put the editor into a new mode. But hitting these keys would give no feedback about what mode you were in. If you actually wanted to enter text, you had to type a letter I, and then you would be in text insert mode, which looked exactly like command entry mode. It was impossible to figure out on your own, and even seasoned VI users would occasionally get confused about what mode they were in. Here are some great ways to make your modes distinct. Change something large and visible on the screen. In Halo and most first-person shooters, when you change weapons, it is very visible. As a side note, the amount of ammo you have left is given through an interesting channel. It is right on the back of your gun. Change the action your avatar is taking. In the classic arcade game Jungle King, you go from a divine swinging mode to a swimming mode. Because your avatar is doing something so obviously different, it is clear that the mode has changed. Also, his hair changes color. That might be overkill. Change the on-screen data. In Final Fantasy games and most RPGs, when you enter combat mode, many combat statistics and menus suddenly come up, and it is obvious there has been a mode change. Change the camera's perspective. This is often overlooked as an indicator of mode change, but it can be very effective. Number 67, the lens of modes. An interface of any complexity is going to require modes. To make sure your modes make the player feel powerful and in control, and do not confuse or overwhelm, ask yourself these questions. What modes do I need in my game, and why? Can any modes be collapsed or combined? Are any of the modes overlapping? If so, can I put them on different input channels? When the game changes modes, how does the player know that? Can the game communicate the mode change in more than one way? Other interface tips. Okay, we've covered interface data flow, feedback, channels, dimensions, and modes. That's a good start. But whole books have been written about the topic of interface design, and we have so many other interesting things to discuss. We must move on. But before we do, here are some general tips for making good game interfaces. Interface tip number 1. Steal. More politely, we would call this the top-down approach to interface design. If you are designing an interface for a known game genre, say an action platform game, you can begin with the interface of a known success in this area and then change it around to suit the things that are unique about your game. This can save you a lot of time, design time, and has the benefit of being a familiar interface to your users. Of course, if your game has nothing new to offer, this will make it feel like a clone. But it is often surprising how one little change leads to another, which leads to another, and before you know it, your clone interface has morphed into something quite different. Interface tip number 2. Customize. Also called the bottom-up approach, it is the opposite of stealing. With this approach, you design your interface from scratch by listing out information, channels, and dimensions like we explained earlier. This is a great way to get an interface that looks unique and is custom to your particular game. If your gameplay is novel, you may find this is the only path available to you. But even if your gameplay is nothing new, you may be surprised when you try to build it from the bottom up. You may find yourself inventing a whole new way to play your game because everyone else has been just copying what is successful, and you took the time to actually examine the problem and try to do a better job. Interface tip number 3. Design around your physical interface. The world of video game development features platforms with radically different interfaces: touch interfaces, motion interfaces, mouse and keyboard, gamepads, and even mixed reality headsets. It is tempting to make games that can work equally well on all these platforms so that you can sell them to as many people as possible. But the truth is that trying to design a game independent of any particular interface is usually a path to a dull game. Think about Angry Birds. Its mega success was partly due to the fact that it used the touch interface so well. Remember the lens of the toy? If the core interaction of your game is a unique type of play that takes advantage of what is unique to that physical interface, it can get enough attention to make giving up those other platforms more than worthwhile. Interface tip number 4. Theme your interface. Often, it is a different artist who designs the interface artwork than the one who designs the game world. In Chapter 6, Theme, we talked about the importance of theming everything, and interface is no exception. Go over every inch of your interface with lens number 11, Unification, and see if you can find a way to tie it all together with the rest of the experience. Interface tip number 5. Sound maps to touch. Usually, when we think of using sound in a game, we think of creating a soundscape to give a sense of place, tweeting birds in a meadow, or to make actions seem more realistic, hearing glass break when you see it break, or to give the player feedback about the progress in the game, a musical glissando when you pick up a treasure. But there's an often overlooked aspect to sound that has a direct bearing on the interface. The human mind easily maps sound to touch. This is important since when we manipulate things in the real world, touch is a central component of feedback we get about manipulation. In a virtual interface, we get little, if any, information through our touch sense. But you can simulate touch by playing appropriate sounds in a way that touchscreen keyboards that click when you type do. First, you have to think about what you would like your interface to feel like if it were real, and then you have to decide what sounds best create that feeling. If you do this successfully, people will marvel at what a pleasure your interface is to use, but they will have difficulty expressing exactly why. I have high hopes that future interfaces will find ways to be more successful in involving tactile feedback, but until they do, sound is your best bet. Interface tip number 6. Balance options and simplicity with layers. When designing an interface, you will be confronted by two conflicting desires: the desire to give the player as many options as possible, and the desire to make your interface as simple as possible. As with so many things in game design, the key to success is striking a balance. And one good way to achieve this balance is by creating layers of interface through modes and submodes. If you've done a good job of prioritizing your interface, you will have a good head start toward figuring out how to do this. Typical video game example of this is hiding inventory and configuration menus under an infrequently used button, such as Start. Interface tip number 7. Use metaphors. A great shortcut to giving a player understanding of how your interface works is by making it resemble something the player has seen before. For example, in designing the game Toytopia, my team had a very unusual constraint. In this game, the player issues keyboard commands, go up, go right, etc., to a small team of wind-up toys. Since it was a synchronous multiplayer game, the plan was to keep things in sync by introducing a delay between when the player issued a command and when a toy would receive it. In this game, the player issues keyboard commands, go up, go right, etc., to a small team of wind-up toys. Since it was a synchronous multiplayer game, the plan was to keep things in sync by introducing a delay between when a player issued a command and when a toy would receive it. This way, we could keep games in sync on different players' machines because the local artificial delay would be the same length as the unavoidable network delay of a signal traveling from one computer to another. Unfortunately, and not surprisingly, players found this to be confusing. They are they are used to button push, taking action immediately, not taking a half second before something happens. The team was frustrated to the point of considering abandoning the whole scheme, but then someone had the idea that if we showed a visible radio signal traveling from the virtual button to the toy and accompanied it by a radio transmission sound effect, it might help players understand the mechanism better. And it worked. With the new system, the radio transmission metaphor clearly explained the delay in action and also gave the players some immediate feedback about what was happening. And under lens number 11, unification, this change helped reinforce the theme, which is about radio-controlled toys. Number 67 and a half, the lens of metaphor. Game interfaces often mimic interfaces to things that are already familiar to players. To make sure your metaphors are aiding players' understanding and not confusing them, ask yourself these questions. Is my interface already a metaphor for something else? If it is a metaphor, am I making the most of that metaphor? Or is the metaphor getting in the way? If it isn't a metaphor, would it be more intuitive if it were? Interface tip number 8, if it looks different, it should act different. Game developers frequently fall into the trap of going against this tip in the name of visual variety. For example, they might be making a game where you fight flying saucers. To add some visual spice, someone gets the idea to have the saucers be different colors. Some are red, some purple, and some green. Players who see this are surely going to think that they are functionally different, that they perhaps go different speeds or have different point values. If they are not, and they just have different paint jobs, players are sure to be disappointed and confused. Similarly, designers often make the opposite mistake, creating two things that look the same but behave differently. For example, you might create an X button that, when pressed, closes part of the interface. Later, in need of a button that allows players to delete items from the game, X might seem like a logical choice to represent delete. But if the same X sometimes means delete and sometimes means close window, it has a good chance of confusing and frustrating players. Interface tip number 9. Test, test, test. No one gets an interface right for the first time. New games require new interfaces, and you cannot take it for granted that your new interface is going to be clear, power-giving, and fun unless you have people try it out. Test it as early as possible and as often as possible. Build prototypes of your interface well before you have a complete playable game. Make paper and cardboard prototypes of any button or menu systems that you have, and get people to act out playing the game and using the interface so that you can see where they are having trouble. Most important, by working with players this way, like an anthropologist, you will start to get better ideas about their intentions from moment to moment, which will inform all of your interface decisions. Finally, interface tip number 10, break the rules to help your player. Since many games are variations on existing themes, there's a lot of copying of interface designs from game to game. So much so that certain rules of thumb tend to show up for each genre of game. These can be useful, but it is easy to follow them slavishly without thinking about whether they are a really good idea for the players of your game. One example involves PC games using a mouse. The left mouse button is considered the main button, and some games choose to use the right mouse button for other functionality. So, a rule of thumb is that the right mouse button should generally not do anything, unless you are in a special mode where it has a purpose. However, this rule is often taken too far, and in simple games, such as children's games, where the right mouse button isn't used at all, most designers tend to leave it completely disabled so that all gameplay happens through the left mouse button. But when children use a mouse, they frequently click the wrong mouse button because their hands are small. Smart designers break this rule of thumb and make the left and right mouse buttons both map to the same action, so that either button can be pressed successfully. Really, why wouldn't you do this for every game that only needs one mouse button? The game interface is indeed the gateway to the experience. Let us pass now through that gateway and look more closely at the experience itself. Other reading to consider. The Design of Everyday Things by Donald Norman. This straightforward, down-to-earth book is full of thoughtful examples of good and bad design of real-world objects and systems. Its wisdom translates surprisingly well to the realm of game design. Game Feel by Steve Swink. This unique book focuses on game interface design at the millisecond level, carefully dissecting what it is that makes games feel great. This is required reading. The Visual Display of Quantitative Information by Edward Tufte. Considered the Bible, or at least the Old Testament, of graphical interface design, this and Tufte's other 3 books can provide deep insights even when you just leaf through them.